point is, were they correct? Which is what we're talking about. Anyway, to boil it down, and again, this is just my not total understanding of it, but
yeah.
I think that when they started, they were one thing, and when it came down to what they should have got out of it, it was a different thing. And the different thing was that it was then Frank's, and he was treating them as sidemen, which they weren't.
That's right.
And then he went on to establish a way of working which was Frank with sidemen, which was fine, because if you
understand that.
Yeah, if you understand that from the start, yeah, great, okay, that's your job, But if you're doing something else and then the rules are changed, and now it's mine, and I give you, what I want to give you, then that's not right,
So you have a problem like that right now?
Well, it's a lot different, but I'll boil it down in fairly simple terms. At one point, in fact, it's kind of the opposite. At one point, I was an employee of Frank's company. I did a certain amount of work during that period, which was a short period, and so that work would legally be work for hire, which means that I was paid for it, and I have no right to any of it. It belongs to whoever owns it now, which would be the Zapp Family Trust. But that was only a short period of time. After that period, the work that I did was on a freelance basis. It wasn't even done for the Zappas. It was done for Warner Brothers, and it was billed on a basis of specific use, and therefore, any other use of it would be something that I should be paid for.
And that it got used for other stuff?
Well, it got used for CD packaging.
Yeah.
That was not part of the original deal,
right,
so to speak. Again, it's very complicated. But
and you didn't get paid for that?
I didn't get paid for any use of it beyond the original use, which was something that I billed Warner Brothers for. Now, Gail has treated it as if it's all work for hire. And let's say the Zappa Family Trust has treated it as if it's all work for hire, and has printed on all of the new releases that they own it, and they put their copyright on the artwork itself.
Right.
Just for the first time. I mean, it was not copyrighted specifically before that. So she's making an assertion that she owns it when I don't believe she should. That's that's the problem I have. Let's say the problem, but that's the situation that exists between me and the Zappa Family Trust.
At this point?
At this point, right.
And you don't need to talk about it anymore, because that's...
Right, well, that pretty much explains it. I mean, she's claiming ownership of all the artwork that I did for them, and on the basis that it was done as work for hire, which it wasn't. Only very small part of it was done work for hire.
Right.
And the law is fairly specific about that work for hire really only exists if you're an employee or if you, through documents, transfer ownership, through an agreement, which we never had. I simply did work. I billed Warner Brothers for the album covers for that job and billed them accordingly. I mean, I billed them based on an album cover, not based on selling them, perpetual rights to do whatever they want with the artwork.
Right. Now, you may not want to answer this question, and I respect that. Is Gail? Do you understand why Gail doesn't follow this? Do you
What do you mean?
Why do you think Gail is being mean on this point?
Well, I'm not saying she's being mean. I'm not actually characterizing her. In fact, I'm going to remove her from the equation.
Yeah.
Because what exists is a Zappa Family Trust, which is a company or an organization, let's say, a very wealthy organization. And I can only look at the way they operate as, a corporation.
Do you know why that corporation is being mean about this, or whatever the word would be?
Again, I don't want to put it into emotional terms, but I think that I think the main thing is that Gail probably never really realized.
Okay, let's just leave it at that.
Because I don't know that she may have at some point just decided to assert and see what happens.
Right.
But I never really realized either, because it never really came up. I was kind of pissed off when the first releases came out and I wasn't consulted or anything, mainly because they were such a lousy job.
Yeah.
And then when I went to Rykodisc and I heard they were going to re-release it, I said, look, you got to redo these, right, And they agreed, and they permitted me to get involved, let's say. They hired me to be involved. But until that point, I never really looked at the legal situation regarding them. Because, first of all, I had a relationship with Frank that I didn't want to blow,
Yeah.
and with the company. And I thought that, if there was a way that we could maybe work together to do something with the art besides just album cover, that we would. But then Gail pretty much, or let's say the Zappa Family Trust, pretty much just took it on themselves to say they own it when they printed their copyright on the new releases.
Right.
So this is something that essentially just came up in the last year. So having done that, then I have to challenge them. And now, through my lawyer, that's what I'm doing, and I'm finding, I believe, that I'm in a good situation that I never realized I was in before.
So that's where it is now. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the chart here, because one could do a long, maybe we'll do this over time, go into the details, because you got here Mark Spitz.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that because the word of that star is similar to that? That's a pun on...
No, I think it's because the Olympics were just that year or something, and yeah, they would have been, right? What year was this, 70?
Well, this came out in 75. Did you do it in 74? And the Olympics would have been 72.
Well, maybe it was... I thought, the Olympics would have been 72 and 76. Well, maybe... Well, I guess it probably would have been the 72 Olympics
Yeah.
I was referring to. But for some reason, I guess he was still around as this, superstar swimmer. So he was just the first person that came to mind.
In the pun context.
Yeah, when I decided to make Aquarium a swimmer,
Okay, now that's your projection. Now you go up to the hose on the industrial vacuum cleaner and you got grunion.
Yeah.
Now, grunion runge, were you aware of those early...
Yeah.
Okay. Is that what that's referring to?
Yeah.
So now you're making a zap. Well, but it's based on the word.
Oh, no, well, I was also aware of the grunion as a fish because when I first came to California and lived on the beach in Venice, that's how we got our dinner some nights, was the grunion runs.
Right. So the word of the original star, that's a pun, that's evoked by whatever word that star is.
Yeah, there was probably some sort of, I don't remember. Again, it would be interesting for me to go back and get a star chart and
retrieve.
Try and recreate the puns. That would be interesting. Yeah.
Or find out what your thought processes were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you got Big Swifty in here anywhere?
I don't think so.
All right, because you got Daryl Zanuck. But what did Frank? Did he discuss?
The reason Daryl Zanuck is in there is because all of these Arabic-sounding names. And there must have been a name, Dar Al something,
Right.
And so I came up with Dar Al Zanuck.
Right. So there are the originals. Some of them were Arabian.
Yeah, and like the Sal names and the Al names.
Right.
They're all like from Arabian names of stars.
Okay. Now, did Frank ever discuss Big Swifty with you, who was a big power in Hollywood?
I don't think so.
Okay.
What album is that from?
What's that, Jerry Graham Wazoo?
Yeah.
Graham Wazoo.
Yeah, okay. Well, then I don't remember. I don't remember the reference without going back and hearing the song.
Right. Now, Sirius, over on the left, that is reference to SIRIUS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is Sirius? Now, that evokes a strange image in the Uncle Meat booklet is Roy with his hand up to his chin, and he's in a thoughtful, concerned facial posture, and he's like studying something that he doesn't find very humorous or he's puzzled by.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see the word serious, I think of the image of Roy. To me, as many years ago, being younger, I said, "Oh, that's Frank satirizing the parents not understanding, or somebody over-intellectualizing and philosophizing or sociologizing about what was going on around him." it's an intellectual posture, the way Roy is in that image. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now that's something you selected.
Well, again, I wouldn't draw any conclusion from it other than that there was a star named Sirius, and that was a pun on the star's name. I don't think I took it past that.
You see, I think that you and Zappa acted out in your art what McLuhan said, and McLuhan said the best form of art in the late '60s, early '70s was collage, but not at the content at any point. The collage was a mirror of the fact that we lived in an environment where the content was obsolete and the form was what was conditioning people, because we cannot project anything serious in these collages.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is, in my interview with Frank years ago, he talks about the Pauline Oliveira concept, that he is presenting elements that are above human consciousness and below, and when they interact, they create a mass in the middle, which is what the human being experiences. But he's talking about the above and below consciousness thing, and it's like the undifferentiated tissue in the Grand Wazoo story is the experience humans feel in interacting with reality. But you and Frank are showing that reality as a collage, but the interesting point is the things above and below consciousness, which is the medium.
Well, that's right. Okay, sure.
So had you read McLuhan?
I'm sure I did, but again, when I did my art, I was doing art. I wasn't really thinking philosophically about it.
But you're acting out what he's saying. Well,
but perhaps that's because what he was saying had a certain truth to it, and so by acting out art, that would be a natural result.
Right. So it's like lumpy gravy. It doesn't hold together in terms of what it says, but there's lots of interesting experiences within it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why people instinctively say, Ben, you can't analyze the content of Frank because the content is not what's going on here, going on with Frank. So
you analyze it.
You can analyze it, but in the end, it becomes your personal projection.
Yeah.
And it's something I could engage with, but the message is that for general use is the content's irrelevant. It's a game. It's playful.
Right. I see what you're saying, yeah. Okay.
And part of the elements of...
It's irrelevant, but I would say that you can't analyze it to the degree that most analysis does,
Right, it's much like the page of Finning Its Wake. You can look at neat patterns in it, but you can't say overall what frame or meaning it's fitting into.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the frame or meaning it's fitting into is that the content's irrelevant, and it's your own projection, and therefore you would have to allow things to happen. But if you're
that's your projection.
Right, that's right. Because
I would say that would be true, but maybe not the only truth.
Right. So see, you and Frank as artists were dealing with the information overload environment of the 60s, which people imitated privately by taking drugs and privately blowing their minds by creating information overload for themselves.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And in that sense, looking at the Seconds interview, how you guys are projecting the psychedelic thing, but the big question was, why were you guys not for drugs? You know what I mean? The general myth is that you and Frank, or at least Frank, was anti-drug,
yeah.
But they're associated with a drug culture, the psychedelic counterculture.
I wasn't anti-drug.
No, you weren't. But the image of Frank is that he was anti-drug.
Well, I think Frank was anti-drug to some extent.
Right, but then you clarify your position in that interview.
I do?
Yeah, you say that I'm not against the insights drugs generate. You say, I think those insights can be done by other means than drugs.
Right.
You do acknowledge that, yes, you could get insights from drugs if it's handled properly.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time you're saying,
I think drugs are very, again, it's another subject that's like oversimplified.
Right. But it's the times. At the time, people were misusing the drugs.
Some weren't.
And some weren't.
Most were.
Most were, some weren't. So it's hard to have an opinion. But it seems that...
One person can do the same thing as another person, and one's misusing it and one isn't.
Right. So isn't it strange?
People have different tolerances.
Right, but...
No tolerance for drugs, so I couldn't use them.
Right. So the thing is that that many people thought that Frank was on drugs because he created the collage effect or simulated drug experience listening to his albums.
Well, I think that was just because, also because people just were, there was, the first time that someone was doing anything that different. You know?
That collage-y.
Just by being different, it was equated with drugs.
Right, but it was...
And I always thought, well, before I met Frank, I thought the same thing. I thought, man, this guy must be doing a lot of drugs. And that's why, you know, when Esther first suggested I meet him and maybe work for him, I don't think so, you know.
Right.
And then she told me, well, no, he doesn't do drugs. And I thought, what, really, you know?
Yeah, because, you know...
Well, he made up his name after Zap Comics. You know?
Right. Yeah, because the Help 'Em a Rock, or whatever it is, Kansas, the Freakout sections, the second sides of the second album, if you had taken drugs, he actually recreated acoustically different stages of the drug experience.
Yeah.
And in 200 Motels, visually, he shows certain paranoid states in the imagery. The video imagery really shows what one sees when one's paranoid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a shark. The yellow shark is coming out of this imagery. The yellow shark was coincidental later, but in 200 Motels there's a section where Jeff is freaking out, and it looks like he's starting to perceive a shark coming at him.
Yeah.
Which is a paranoid state you can hallucinate when you're on drugs.
Right.
So the interesting thing is that...
Also have that paranoid state without being on drugs.
Right. Now the interesting thing is that Frank, in the drug culture, could simulate the drug experience, so everybody thought, geez, this guy knows the drug experience and he's replaying it for me, he must have done drugs, he knows it.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that he could do it without doing drugs, even though he did take 10 joints once. He said in his youth he smoked marijuana about 10
No,
times.
I don't believe that.
You don't believe that he did do joints 10 times?
I believe he did it 10 times, perhaps, but I think he did it a couple times maybe.
Yeah, and he says he fell asleep and he got nothing out of it.
Yeah.
But, so he had some insight on psychology, or what happens to people in altered states.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it's because he actually himself was a paranoid and he knew what emotional states one can go through when you're neurotic, or whatever you want to call the vulnerable state you're in when you experience that.
Perhaps, but I think it wouldn't necessarily be, I mean, that wouldn't be necessary. I mean, it could also be just simply being intelligent enough to
Figure it out,
determine it, and, you know, look at other observations about the states and about drugs, and, you know, particularly because he was so cynical about it all.
Yeah.
And satirizing it. When you satirize something, you know, you can intellectually, or let's say intelligently, determine what you're doing.
Yeah.
Without necessarily having experienced it.
But that's right. Now the thing is that he is presenting collage, and the collage experience of citizens in the 60s. Then they imitated it with the drugs, and then Frank mirrors it back with them with his stuff and your graphics.
Mm-hmm.
You can see why you're situated in a time. Your style fits a time.
I can. I always felt I was counter to the time.
Well, that's the point. Because you guys could show it up, you presented a mirror, then you're a counter to the time. But it's perceived as...
To me, the psychedelic look was so limited.
Right. You don't have a psychedelic look, but you have a psychedelic effect because of the collage element. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you had to be detached to create the effect.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, you weren't part of it. But isn't it interesting that you guys get typecast in that as part of the symptoms?
I know.
Rather than doing what art does, is holding up a mirror.
Yeah.
And you guys presented a very accurate mirror
Mm-hmm.
of what was going on.
Uh-huh.
And but it's a communication problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a dilemma of any artist who works in pop culture. It's consumed for different reasons.
Right.
And Frank was always wrestling with that. I mean, that's what Larry the Dwarf in 200 Motels discusses. Or Don Preston, if you put the sock over here on the left, it's commercial.
Right.
If you put the sock over here on the right, it is not commercial, it's avant-garde. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's really neat how Frank could act that out, or was aware of the dilemma of communicating in the TV culture.
Yeah.
And did you guys talk about that, or was it just instinctive for you two to be like that?
Yeah, it was instinctive.
Yeah, so what do you think in your personality made you anti that? Is this the genius part?
When you say anti-what?
Anti-drugs, See, you guys were outside of the situation, satirizing it, or commenting on it. You had to
Well, I would say that I was led that way by Frank to some extent because
there's a
I
key
was
point.
working for Frank.
Now that's a key point, right?
I don't, you know, I was at home there because I was while not anti-drug, I couldn't use drugs. I mean, it just didn't agree with me.
Right, you tried it and it didn't work.
Well, I wouldn't say it didn't work. I was just too sensitive to them or allergic to them or something.
Right, so
I mean, at least the main drugs that were of interest to people, particularly marijuana.
and if you weren't allergic, you might have done it more.
Probably, yeah.
Right, and so a person who by accident works with a guy who wants to be anti-drugs.
Well, I don't know that it's by accident.
Yeah, right. It may not be accident, but within normal human perception, he was lucky to find someone to do the kind of art that he needed.
Fortunate.
Fortunate to do the art he needed, and that person wasn't necessarily had the same attitude as Frank, but was useful to Frank and was influenced by Frank on that point.
Yeah, well, that's what I think. A lot of it was karma, you know.
Oh, now we're getting metaphysical, which I can get into, but let's hear some theories. It's not embarrassing to talk about that for me. I mean, I'm the guy who interviewed the dead Frank, so so what? Tell me about karma. What you know, whatever personal level you want to talk about in relation to Frank.
Well, I don't know that I can actually.
But it's an instinctive feeling that you feel.
Because you know, so many things did happen. First of all, the fact that I kept running into Frank before I actually even met him.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That lead me to believe. Of course, I believe in karma because I'm a Buddhist. You know, I practice Buddhism, and it's to me as logical a way of looking at reality as any other. You know, so
right.
I think that it's a valid concept. Karma is simply causality, cause and effect on another level.
Well, just as an aside, I agree with you. But when I was first looking at Frank's early albums and pictures of you guys, I always had to make an extra effort to say, "Oh, that's Kelvin, and this is Frank." Sometimes I couldn't tell the difference. Whatever image of shot photographs, I'd have to be real. I'd have to take a second look. So you guys were similar physically in my mind way back then.
Okay.
Your faces. Did you ever have that problem, Jerry, when you first looked at these people?
No, but just looking at the
picture up there.
They have big noses.
Yeah. You look at the Picture in Life magazine. I know the difference, but I know when I first looked, I had to really look, say which guy's Frank and which is Kelvin, or you know what I mean?
Oh.
So you guys were twins. You were Shem and Sean in a way.
Shem and Sean?
Yeah, from Finnegan's Wake.
Oh.
The twins. So anyways, so the karma, you became a Buddhist later?
Oh, yeah.
Right, so you're projecting your realization of Buddhism back on your relationship with Frank when you say it's karma. Now, what do you think is...
I mean, I always kind of felt that there was such a thing as karma, but I never really understood it until I became a Buddhist.
So what is...
Until I hate to even say I became a Buddhist, but let's just say until I started practicing Buddhism and then studying it and then having my own insights about it.
So what is
I always felt that there was such a thing. I just didn't really know what it meant.
Right, so you can't say what the karmic connection is between you and Frank.
No, and I don't think that's, there may be a possible way to do that, but that's not necessary, you know.
Yeah, I could find out through the medium. I could talk to Frank because the medium does explain past lives and future lives because the medium, the entities coming through the medium go into how all time exists. It agrees. Frank was right. You know, if I'm talking to real spirit, or whatever that thing is that's coming through the medium, they're a group of entities called...
Ultimately, the spirit is the medium.
Right. And they say all time is happening all the time. It's all our lives are happening at the same time.
Well, yeah, but see, the problem is that when you use words have specific meanings, and when you use those words to mean other things, then they don't. When you say time has a specific meaning.
Yeah.
And when you say all things happen at all time, you're using a word that has a specific meaning to explain something that really can't be explained with words.
So you disagree with Frank making those statements, that he wasn't able to communicate that?
First of all, I'd have to look at the statement and analyze what I thought of the statement. But
right.
In general, to say, okay, all things are happening at all time, is to say, or all time is happening simultaneously, or something to that effect, is to put yourself outside of the scope of the word time, because time means...
Yeah, you
I mean, there is no such thing as time. You have time-space.
Yeah.
There is the time-space continuum. And when you say time, you're really, the word is a metaphor for something that you can't actually single out as a separate thing.
Right.
Because there is no such thing as time.
Right.
You have time-space. And time-space is, everything. It's the eternity of all of reality, which is nothing more than the fusion of the subjective and the objective. So if you try to explain it with the separate part that isn't actually a part, it's maybe metaphorically you can get a glimpse of what that means, but that's not really what it is.
That's right. That's the mystery of perception or cognition.
Yeah.
Now that's the image, as you say this, that's what you're showing on the one-size-fits-all chart. You're showing implications of all time. You've got dinosaur, cars, people. It's all time, and it only can be a collage.
Yeah.
So even
I kind of like that idea of juxtaposing incongruous elements. I think that's, of course, that's what surrealism is to a large extent, isn't it?
Yes. But here's the thing, that you and Frank, if you give the surrealists and dadists credit in a certain way, that they did it and you guys replayed it, you just replayed it in a later time in a new cultural context, pop music. But if it's an eternal wisdom, then it's been redone. But that is what's similar. The way I think what you just said is in response to Frank's statement, but Frank was trying to say the same thing you just said.
Perhaps.
Because he said he disagreed with Einstein.
Mm-hmm.
He said that Einstein thought that space and time were interchangeable. Frank said, no, time is the sphere that space, as a Mobius strip, operates within. But that, in a way, is a bunch of gobbledygook, but he's trying to point out that what you guys think is time, if you use Einstein as a basis, is wrong. It's just a metaphor, and Einstein doesn't know what he's talking about, because you can't talk about it.
Right.
So in that sense, you and Frank are saying the same thing.
Perhaps.
Now, did you have that idea back then in '67? You were working with that concept?
Well, I might have actually, probably, and one of the reasons I didn't use drugs was because I had some drug experiences that were rather unpleasant. And again, I think because I was pretty sensitive to them, but some of these experiences, which later on, after I started practicing Buddhism and I really understood the nature of reality, I can go on to say that I did understand things that I was...
In retrospect?
In retrospect, yeah. So perhaps, that's where round things are boring comes from, too, actually.
Right. Yeah, that, you were saying that seriously in the piano, and you knew what you meant, and in retrospect, you're more articulate and understand it later through Buddhism.
Right.
Yeah. So, round things are boring. How does that relate to time? I mean, I guess I know what you mean, but let's just say what you thought you said when you said it.
Well, I'm not sure that I can really explain that.
We've just explained it.
I would have to say that it has something to do with, the continuous repeating of events.
Right. And that's time, as we think it is, or something.
Well, I think you could say that ultimately everything repeats itself.
Now,
but see, if you look at that from the standpoint of our perception of time, it's almost...
it doesn't.
Well, but if you look at it from our limited, very small perception of time, it's like looking at a picture of a star, or looking at a picture of a star map, or looking at the sky and looking at the stars and thinking that that's what a star is, or what a galaxy is, the picture that you have in your brain of what a galaxy is, and then suddenly realizing that, well, how huge it is,
Yeah, how puny your image is.
Yeah, how puny your image is compared to the reality of, the universe.
That's right.
The vastness of the universe is something that you can only really appreciate and kind of, you can grok it,
Yeah. Yeah, well, you realize you
perceive it.
You actually become aware of your brain is a faulty instrument because the way you think you use it and it gives you an image, But if you step outside of that, you say, this brain ain't telling me nothing about what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. So
you can't actually step outside of it. You can
intuit being outside of it. Well, that's another paradox. You can't get out of it, but you do. You just expressed an awareness of the inadequacy.
Yeah.
You do have that experience.
But ultimately, we can only experience it through our experience anyway, because that's all that there is experience.
Yeah, now you get into the paradox of consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when you say round things are boring, boring implies negative, so what is the complaint? You know, is round, you know what I mean?
Well, I think at the time, again, it was based on a perhaps faulty but limited view of that experience of experiencing this kind of echoing of continual repeating existence, you know?
Yeah, visually and sound-wise echoing.
Yeah.
So when you got in the piano, Frank.
You know, it just came to mind. Is really what it boils down to.
Right, in the piano.
Spontaneous thing that I said.
But here's the thing: is that you were put in the piano and encouraged to talk.
Yeah.
Did you think it?
Out of my subconscious.
Right, but did you think it? Okay, we're going to have a serious discussion, or was the absurdity always there, which freed up your mind to be a little sillier?
Well, I think I probably couldn't think of anything to say, so I had to rely on my subconscious.
Right, and in the interaction that
really aware. I mean, because I'm a very self-conscious person.
Yeah.
I'm extremely self-conscious, and especially more so in the past. You know, when I was younger.
And Frank people used to say that he was very self-conscious.
Well, perhaps, but he was also I would say, much more secure in his persona, you know.
Right. In other words, he could go on stage if he had to, whereas you were always behind the scenes because you wouldn't go on stage.
Right, because I was very insecure in that sense.
Right. Yeah. So the thing is, did Frank hand out any scripts for the conversations in the piano?
No.
No
There might have
scripts.
been times when he might have influenced the direction of the discussion.
Well, there are tapes, you know, where he comes in, say something about this, or he did interject, but that was just his input.
Yeah.
But you people would then follow it because he was the leader, so to speak.
Yeah.
It would give you a clue.
Right.
So he did write it on a larger frame level.
Yeah.
The suggestive. He was the central scrutinizer, you know, seducing his advertising metaphor, seducing the situation a little bit in a certain direction.
Right. Right.
But he did. There's the control freak. But he allowed you guys to say anything you want.
Yeah.
So it's a.
Well, I think that that's kind of normal anyway, because I mean, unless let's say you put a bunch of people in a room and say everything you want. Well, if it goes well, then you don't need to exercise any control. If it gets either going in the wrong direction based on what you want to do, or if there's maybe nothing really happening, then you interject.
You interpret, and that's not a control freak. That's just aesthetic judgment. It's proper to do that.
It's creating his art, so that's. I never really thought. I mean, I wouldn't put Frank in just that control freak capacity myself anyway. I mean, he certainly had that capacity, but it wasn't just that. And in fact, he goofed on it a lot himself, you know, obviously.
Yeah, so that when you heard Lumpy Gravy the first time, the tape, whatever point that you got the tape and heard the album, either when it came out or whenever.
Well, I was actually there when he was editing it.
Okay, but then you were there part of the process. Then when you go, whenever, 2 weeks later, 2 years later, you sit down and listen to it, did you have any surprises or insights about what Frank created from the chaos, the anarchy, how he created order out of it? Or was there order for you out of it?
You know, I don't think I really analyzed it that much because I was a part of it and I just enjoyed it, you know.
But he picked you. Isn't Round Things, does that begin the album or does it end the album again?
On the album.
Beg pardon?
That's the last thing on the album.
Right, so you listened to it. You did not know he was going to...
Last thing on the side one? I'm not sure now.
Anyways, it is an end point.
Maybe before the last musical piece, I don't know.
Right, but it stands out.
Yeah.
Now, you were there with all these other people who were saying things. You did not know that statement would end up standing out on the album. You know what I mean? You did not
Right.
anticipate.
Oh, I guess you could say that, but you know, when I said it, it just seemed somehow to resonate.
You knew you had wrapped it up.
Well, I knew that I had said something that was somehow important.
Oh, okay, so then when you hear the album, I mean, did you know during the making of it that he was going to feature it at that point? You know, at the...
Not really. I mean...
Right, so you don't know it till you hear the album, right?
Right.
And then you're gonna say, well, Frank's pretty smart. He knew I said something profound, and he puts it there at the right place.
Sure.
So then you have to be impressed with Frank organizing the chaos.
Yeah, definitely.
So that was your experience with Lumpy Gravy. You were impressed with the way he organized it.
Oh, yeah.
Even though for most people it wasn't organized. It's just the chaos stuff, you know. I would listen to it and think about different parts, like Motorhead and this and that. You could think about parts of it and find order in what Frank was pointing out.
You know, I think, again, being an artist, I perhaps appreciated its organization as an art statement, too, more.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think it's really well organized artistically, and that perhaps is the first the first criteria that I tested, that I put it to the test. In fact, I was listening to a lot of Music Concrete even before I met Frank, you know, so I was into that kind of work. So it didn't strike me as being odd, you know.
Right. On the content level, you know, you understood what he was working with.
Yeah. So, I mean, I appreciate its artistic merit right from the start, I think.
And then, but are you saying, what is the test there? You were testing your future interaction with Frank based on what he came up with?
What test?
Okay, you said that was the test. What was the test?
I said that was a test?
Didn't he, Jerry?
Missed it.
Oh, I'm hallucinating here. I think, okay, you were impressed with the album.
Mm-hmm.
You knew what he was working with. Were you super impressed with what he did?
Well, I really liked it. Yeah, I really liked it. So if that's what you mean by impressed with.
Right, well, okay. You look at it another way. Here's the synchronicity. You've got the sphere, you got the outer region of the sphere, and you've got round things are boring. And I'm sure when Frank disagreed with Einstein, that was a quote I understand came up many years later. You're actually showing Frank's reality. You've got the outer sphere, which is time, and if round things are boring refers to time in your mind, all right? Then the content is this Mobius strip of forms inside, flipping into or merging and...
Yeah, but, you know, that's a pretty easy conclusion to come to when you have something that's round and has stuff inside of it.
Yeah, but that's exactly...
Yeah, I mean, the basic structure of the star chart came from the star chart they have in National Geographic.
Right, but no, but Zappa says that his image of time is a sphere, and inside it is the Mobius strip of space.
Mm-hmm.
You have shown this.
Well, but that's your interpretation.
Right.
I mean, you're saying that I've shown that to you. I mean, that was
Right.
my intention of showing Frank's interpretation of time with this piece.
Well, if you agree that okay, it is my interpretation, and we agree on some kind of level. It's funny that you showed his idea, you know, before he said it, but he probably had it. There's where you are the karmic twins. So you were the right artist to do. You're the right artist to do this, and you put round things are boring right in the right spot.
Yeah.
And you're now admitting that actually was the deep statement that you were working with in dealing with time, at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's see, if karma is underlying order, you know what I mean? It's synchrony with order in it. Order in the sense, now every word we say does not say what we're trying to say, right? Because words can't say it.
Right. All words are metaphors, and you can't. I mean, that's all they are.
Right. So there's a line from T.S. Eliot. The character says, "I got to use words when I talk to you." So you've got you're not involved with words without an awareness of their metaphor. Frank's not involved with words without an awareness of their metaphor. In other words, you're both aware of the awareness of verbal communication, and then he expresses that musically, and you express it graphically.
Yeah.
So why would he have the cover of Just Another Band from L.A.? Was that done by you?
Yeah.
Okay, now you got Cal on the license plate at the front of the car.
Uh-huh.
So that can be California, right?
Right.
But it's also you.
Right.
Is that a little joke?
Yeah.
Yeah. And is that supposed to be your signature there? No, I guess you sign it somewhere else. Or you just give.
I don't have it in front of me, so I don't.
Okay, the picture on Inside, just another band from L.A. The workroom, where is that place at that time? Where was that?
Where you came to visit me up in Upperton.
That's what I always felt. You just
Yeah.
confirmed it. Matter of fact,
But it was put together just for that photograph because I didn't really have a working space that was quite like that.
you did it?
Yeah, I just fabricated it for that photograph.
Oh, it says fraudulently reenacted situation.
Right.
With one of those little take you now. I always wondered where that was, and it was at that place, but I wouldn't have seen that.
No,
Where was it in the
not
bed?
organized in that house.
That's right. Was it where you had the speakers and I listened to 200 Motels, or was it in
It
another?
was actually in the back bedroom. Because
Where I saw you with the French woman, if she was French.
possibly, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like the back room.
Yeah.
So, what were you communicating there? That you're overworked?
Yes.
And you're not getting paid and all that?
Right.
Is it after you had got pissed off and fallen away from Frank, and then came back?
Yeah, this was after coming back.
Right. So you're actually commenting on your Frank relationship here.
Yeah.
That you were forced to come back for whatever reason, and you needed money, and you had to work under.
I wasn't making that strong a comment on that. I mean, I'm joking when I say that because what I really was just, I was working hard on stuff, and I was tired, and thought, well, this would be a funny thing, I'll just put my head down. But I took a bunch of other pictures, and that was the one that looked the best, But the reason, really, to reenact the whole thing was simply because I didn't have a studio, per se. I was, and
Yep.
never had one, actually.
Right.
In a complete form. And so the only way to really do it was to create a little, fake one.
Right. Now.
I wanted to show that there was like a storyboard for this, really the mountain story, because Frank wanted to do that at the time. But that's all the further it got.
That's right. But if someone knows your biography, as you're spelling out in this interview, then you can see that within your own mind, it's a comment on working with Frank in particular,
Yeah.
which came out of a grievance you had earlier.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say, I wouldn't make that much of a big deal out of the grievance part of it, because if I was that aggrieved by it, I wouldn't have been working for him.
Right. And you wouldn't have come back.
Right.
And
when I did come back, things were different. Because I was then independent.
With
Warren. When I left, it was because I was leaving employ.
Right, and you came back under Warner's.
I came back as an independent. All the work I did after that was freelance. So I was independent. I could take a job or not, The fact is, I probably took every job that Frank gave me. But I was independent. I wasn't an employee, and I worked then under my own terms. Of course, there were always usually rush deadlines, so you still had to work overtime. But on the other hand, I was setting the rules myself, basically.
Right. What was the